And we're live, gentlemen. It's 11:59.
All right.
Good to be back here with you guys, as always.
Freerun Monday.
I love it.
One of my favorite things of the week.
Oh, yeah. I love it.
It gets me through the weekend, you know.
It definitely does for me. I love doing promo shoots on my in my backyard.
It's next level. Got to give you the credit for that, Mike. Your Instagram game has really stepped up.
Well, you've taught me so well over
Very
the
quickly.
years. I mean, it's been a progress, but it's been a work in progress. But I owe a lot to you.
So we kick things off.
Let's do it.
Great. Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Freerun Talks, where we talk about the state of the food and beverage industry. I'm joined today by my distinguished hairless colleagues, Mr. Mike Laszlo out of Boulder, Colorado, and Dustin Wilson from Irvine in New York City. So let's dive into this. You know, it's almost as though the underlying topic of every conversation we've had the past couple weeks has been PPP. And we've been talking about changes and fixes that are potentially coming. And this week, we actually heard that those changes are upon us. So, Mike, can you fill us in on what you've heard or what we learned this past week?
Yeah, the number one thing is that the fix is in. We've all been dying for this thing, especially, really the restaurant world has been begging and lobbying and strongly petitioning for some type of a fix, and it happened. So the House and Senate got this to the president, and it was signed on Friday. So the fix quite literally is in, which is great.
And so high level, what are the biggest takeaways for people?
The biggest takeaway is the 75-25 percentage rule that you had to use 75% of the PPP forgiveness amount for payroll is now 60%. And then the other 40% can now be used for rent, mortgage, excluding interest, and other qualifying utilities. So it really frees up, some movement there to help with rent issues. The other thing that to me is just huge is the 24-week use period versus the 8-week.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you a lot of time. I mean, that's really a nice. That is a very nice period of time in which to use this. So those are the two giant takeaways for me. Another one that's going to require quite a bit of kind of delving into some rules is the potential for the FTE requirement that was in place, that you had to bring back a certain number of FTE full-time equivalents by the end of June. Now would be pushed to December 31st, 2020. But if an employer could show in good faith that it was not able to return to pre-COVID business levels, that deduction would not apply. Now, I expect to see some rules coming around this, but high level, it looks like you might not have to meet that FTE requirement.
Mm-hmm. So can we take a quick minute just to define FTE, because I feel like I've been getting a lot of questions from restaurateurs and other people in the industry about what FTE actually means. And I know, Sabato, you've got a pretty good handle on this. Can you kind of just break down what an FTE number would be like and how to calculate that?
Not to be confused with FTD, the floral delivery service that sends us flowers from each week. But FTE, full-time equivalent. And so basically it looks at the number of hours worked that a full-time employee works over the course of a year. And so over the course of the year, a FTE equals 2,080 hours. So 2080 is the FTE hour equivalent. So if you were to look at that on a weekly basis, it could be you and I each working part-time 20 hours, and that equals 1 FTE for that week. If we looked at it, could be 40 individuals working 1 hour this week, and that equals 1 FTE for that week. So it's how many employees do you have working 40 hours? So if you were to total all the hours together, divide by 2080, that's a good estimate of how many FTEs you actually have on your team.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good distinction, right? Because I think some people were looking at it from as like a full-time employee, like that needs to be one person. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be one person, it just needs to be the equivalent. So you can actually have multiple people that add up to that same number.
Yeah, and the IRS definition of full-time is 30 hours, so it doesn't necessarily have to be that 40. If there were 40 going into the calculation, they should be 40 coming out of the calculation. But if it was 30 and that's acceptable, and that's something that you were doing, it looks like 30 will be permitted. So there's some leeway there. But again, I expect to see additional rules or a rewrite of the prior rules to address these new situations.
And I think, yeah, overall, it's the good news is that the bar was lowered in terms of the percentage of dollars that can go towards employees and more that can be forgiven as it goes towards those other expenses. And I say that that's a good thing from the standpoint of, as you look at cities where it takes longer to ramp up, those restaurants are going to have a harder time achieving or spending 60% on that, but they're also going to have more money that's accruing for their other expenses. And so being able to pay and cover both of those, I think is a win on that front.
Yeah, Sabto, if you're a restaurant right now that got the money, 2 weeks ago, maybe started spending, maybe you're one payroll in, maybe you're even a couple of payrolls in. Now that this has changed, how are you looking at spending that money now that you have such a longer period of time to do so?
Well, I think you need to, I would start by writing a budget for it. And so however much you have, understand what that threshold is for, first of all, the FTEs, what that needs to be met and by what date. Then I would work backwards from there and say, okay, if I receive, let's just use $100,000, for example. If I received $100,000, 60% of that minimum needs to go towards payroll. So what does that actually look like on a weekly basis and how many FTEs? And at what point am I going to be able to ramp up to that? Because it would be a shame if you spent all that money now and then you didn't have it to spend if you weren't open. And then when you went to reopen and you needed to actually bring staff back, you didn't have that money. That would be an unfortunate use of it.
Yeah, there are going to be people in that situation that did spend the money because they got it day one and didn't hold on to it. Now, maybe not through any fault of their own. They used it for what it was intended. And yeah, that may be unfortunate. But now that you're cash flowing, this to me seems like a hell of a lifeline.
It is. And on the other side, you could also back into it and say, what's the max that I could actually do on the rent, the mortgage, and utilities in terms of the dollar amount? And then what each of those costs each month, how much of that can you cover in how many months? And that's where I would start really getting my head around that to understand those levers. But the good news is 24 weeks gets you all the way to almost the end of the year. And I think that's really, really great because you're not going to be able to open the doors and ta-da, it's back to normal. You need to figure out what that is, but it allows you to be more strategic with it and say, okay, do I actually hold off now? If I can use some of that to just cover my fixed costs, my rent, my utilities, et cetera. If I can actually use that to stay dark now, how do I then start ramping up to get a running start so I can actually utilize the 60% towards my payroll and my FTEs when I can do maximum amount of revenue with that?
Yeah, and if you got a fair amount, I mean, you can now just maybe not take a deep breath, but start to breathe and understand that, hey, look, I'm using government money here to maybe test the reopening waters. I mean, we're at 50%. I don't know if the city at this point is over 50% occupancy permitted. So you can test out new things. And you're doing it with house money, because the other point that we haven't brought up is the loan period has gone from 2 years at 1% to 5 years at 1%. I mean, that's significant. Now, if you don't seek forgiveness, 5 years at 1% is a pretty fair deal. If you have a good business model in place, I don't want to diminish the difficulty of paying back a loan, but 5 years at 1%, if you have a good business going, you should be able to accommodate at least some portion of that.
Because my concern was that with that short time frame of 2 years, you have to be cash flow positive basically to be able to start paying that back.
Yeah.
If you have spent it all, and that was be a real struggle, I think, for a lot of restaurants. So 5 years definitely helps. And then, Mike, there was also the safe harbor aspect of it. Was that included prior, or was this the first time we've heard about the safe harbor?
I think that was a new ad, but I'll have to go back and look. This is where, this is really the idea that if there was the good faith inability to get back to the levels, this is the way I understood the legislation, then you wouldn't have to get back to those pre-COVID levels by that June 30th date, now the December 31st date. So that to me is it's new here. The idea itself of getting back to those original numbers of FTE was in the first, as we all know, but this change is new. And I think, again, I commend the IRC, frankly, and the NRA for having a hand in getting this for restaurants, because I think what it does, this very, very clearly reflects the realities of this hardship for restaurants and bars. I mean, that's what this really does. It says, there's no way we're getting back to these numbers. That's just never going to happen. You've cut us off at the knees here. I mean, you haven't allowed us to reopen with all these employees. How can you expect us to bring them back? So this legislation, it's kind of interesting and refreshing. It happened so fast, and it was such a clear reaction to an actual need based on real circumstances. So, I mean, frankly, kudos to the IRC for getting this through the House, the Senate, the President for signing it so fast, and it actually helps. Not used to seeing legislation that helps.
Great thing all around.
It is.
Is there any difference?
More time, more flexibility.
Is there any difference if you received the first tranche of money or the second tranche? Any difference in the application?
In the, what do you mean the application?
Meaning if I received money the second time versus the first time, these exemptions, do they blanket across both?
My understanding is that it doesn't matter when you got the money or what application you filled out, that things have changed. This will apply to the money.
These are the new rules.
These are the new rules. If you got the money early, you have been operating under those other rules, and I certainly understand that. But it's my understanding that you would now take these rules. If you have, let's say you've got 200,000, you have 100,000 left, take these rules and apply it to the whole thing.
Yep,
it's why too late for the money you've spent.
Like Sabado said, it's a good moment. You've got a little more time now. You can kind of pause for a second, put a plan together. There's not as much of a rush, to use this money. I think that was part of the problem before, is there was almost kind of needed to use the money quickly in order to try to get it forgiven. It wasn't set up all that well. Now you can actually take a moment, kind of take a deep breath, plan it out a little bit more, put a business plan around it, and spend it wisely.
Yeah, you may recall early in the show, we were talking about ways to get rid of the money to meet that 75%. Who can we go get off the street and hire?
Now it seems that the emphasis of this changed from like, let's just get people on payroll so we can keep unemployment numbers, obviously they still drops quite a bit, but prevent as much unemployment as possible, to now it's like, okay, we need to save the businesses. We need this to change to save the business. And it seems they've done that pretty well.
And with that, as an operator, as you're looking at the business plan coming out of this, you're definitely not as profitable as you were going into it. And so the business model before might have been, let's open 7 days a week. And when we have, full capacity at lunch and dinner, at least we're covering our costs. Well, now if you look at your business and say, okay, based on what I'm seeing with the volume and what I'm seeing with the, any restrictions you have on capacity, does that still make sense? Or do you say, I'm going to ease into this in a different way, and I'm actually going to focus my operations inside the four walls to, is it 3 days? And then I can be more efficient with the other 4 days, and I can do things that actually help get ahead for opportunities outside of the four walls? Or are those the times when I actually have people coming in to do R&M and doing things that are helping strategically position me better for when we do ramp up for it? So again, it's not just dust off the old playbook, put it in, but I think it's really looking at it day by day, shift by shift, and say, does it make sense for me to open? And it's okay if it doesn't, but how do you use these dollars to actually, as an investment, to increase your profitability down the road when you are fully up and running?
Yeah, because this has obviously been a huge win and a big help and a little sigh of relief for, being able to use some capital to smartly continue to operate your business, but it certainly hasn't changed a lot of the headwinds that are still ahead, right? Like, operating at lesser capacity, the PPE, necessities that are needed here. There's still a lot of things that are standing in the way of restaurants becoming profitable. So, while this is a sigh of relief, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to be able to bridge yourself out of this in the long term. Because, we're still looking at probably at least 10 to 12 months before there's a sign of a vaccine, right? And I think that's when people will start to feel more comfortable and we can maybe get back to these 100% levels. So you've got some work to do until then.
And if you go back to how we were thinking of it before, it was like, wow, how am I going to, if June 31st was the day that, the deadline for forgiveness, it was really it was overwhelming for an operator to think of, how am I going to even, go about hiring everyone, getting them back and getting open and starting things up. I don't have time to do any of this other stuff. And so now, we're talking about doing training and things like that. Then it was more, well, that means I have to just pay people to stay at home. Well, that's definitely not the right way to do it. So how do you look forward to this? And also, and say, okay, now I actually have time to bring on selected people. I can actually put together those training programs that I want to implement when we start ramping up. And then in addition to that, when you look at that, how you can be a little more just strategic altogether in terms of how many and doing it in different tiers, but also who those people are that are coming on board to your team.
Yeah, what I've noticed in across industries in my practice, and then just with colleagues, is over the past 2 weeks, I don't know why it stood out over the past 2 weeks, but I've noticed more companies doing rounds of layoffs, and I look at it and think that this is taking advantage of an opportunity to clean house with the minimal kickback or pushback, and negative thoughts. It's like, let's use this opportunity to slim down or cut dead weight where we see it. And I think for restaurants who had to cut all of their, cut essentially everybody, it's not cutting people, it's who do we bring back? Right. And it goes to things we've been talking about over the past couple months. Maybe I don't need all of these people on the floor. Maybe I don't need all these people in the back of the house. Maybe this person can do 2 jobs. And now you get to look at, what do I want my restaurant or any business to look like 2 years from now? Let's start building it now. We have an opportunity here to build an employment base and build a company culture in a way that you couldn't just fire everybody in February. But now you have a blank slate. You can say, let's bring back who we want back.
And I'll add too, we've talked about this before, but even, we've had a lot of protests going on and talking about diversity and in workplace and just in the nation in general. And how do you use this time to proactively say, here's what I want to make sure that my leadership team, my management team, and my workforce represents and looks like. And I think now is a time you can be very strategic in doing that, moving forward with it. And
absolutely,
that's one of the silver linings of where we are right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, what an opportunity to, again, rebuild an institution where you just could not have done that absent the COVID excuse, essentially. You couldn't just go clean house.
I held up the mirror to myself as I was watching this unfold this past week, and there was a picture of a bunch of folks in the White House discussing, okay, how do we handle this, the accusations of systematic racism? How can we make sure we can, solve this? And I realized that when I was looking there, it was a boardroom full of white men. And I said, wow, you know what? I've actually been on leadership teams where I didn't represent, or we didn't represent the entire constituent of our teams and all of our restaurants. We're one of the most diverse industries that's out there. So that's something that I said, you know what? I need to do a better job of that. Or how can we as organizations and leaders in the hospitality industry do that so that as we're bringing people on, they say, you know what, the people that are running this company understand where I'm coming from, understand what I might be struggling with, but also can help have my voice heard and at the table when decisions are being made that impact us culturally. And I think that was a big takeaway for me as I did some quarantine reflecting this past week.
Yeah, super important. And yeah, to Mike's point, it's a great opportunity, right? It's like how many chances do you as a business owner get the chance to rebuild from the ground up, right? You can restructure everything from your menu to your drink list, your wine list, your team, how you structure labor, potentially maybe renegotiating with your landlord. This is a chance for you to kind of come at this really strategically on various levels, from the business side and from the kind of social responsibility side of things. So, I think everybody should think about that and take it really seriously and, jump on this opportunity. I think it's great.
Yeah. And just to kind of close the loop on the PPP, if you have money available because of it, you now have the opportunity to at least have some room here to make some changes in all aspects. And it wasn't there last week. It's here this week, and so that's nice. Yeah, I think if you're not looking at it, then you're wasting the opportunity.
So let's pivot a little bit here, and something that came out over the weekend that we thought was really interesting is kind of this data collection that the American Association of Wine Economists pulled together. And what they did was essentially look at the wine industry and tried to understand who was donating to which of the 2020 presidential candidates, which companies that were donating to these campaigns. And it started to bring up, I saw it circulating around on social media and various platforms, and I think it raises a lot of questions, right? It's I think the first thing is obviously, why should we care about this, and what's the point of it? And I think going into it straight away, it's easy to start looking at it and saying, okay, I want to see who's donating to the candidates that I don't want to be involved with, or I want to look at the candidates who are being donated to that I am looking to vote for. And it's an opportunity for us as consumers, right, to kind of vote with our money, so to speak. And I'd love to kind of get your guys' thoughts on this. I think there's a lot of digging that you can get into with these things, and it brings up a lot of questions, right? It brings up a question of, how relevant is this data? Can we trust this data? I think is a really good question to ask. I think it also gets into the point of, how dogmatic are you going to be as a consumer when you see some of this data? For instance, you scroll through these things, I see like a server at a restaurant donated to such and such campaign. Am I gonna boycott that entire restaurant because a server decided to donate and I'm really upset about it? Or am I only gonna do that when it's the ownership? So, Mike, where do you stand?
It's interesting. Well, the first thing that came to mind when I saw it was, okay, how did we collect the data? And you said something earlier when you're introducing the topic, that it was companies that were donating. These are actually, from what I see of the list, they're individuals. And so if I was to donate to a particular campaign, I would put Mike Laszlo in. I assume I would have the option to fill out, or maybe I don't know, frankly. I would put Laszlo Law, Boulder, Colorado, or whatever it would be. And that all that information goes in. And I think that's what we're looking at. So in that example you used with the server.
But how the data is presented is really interesting because it does tie these individuals to companies. So
no, I asked. So I will say I asked.
I think it's important to understand from, as a person that's looking at it, you got to recognize that this one person maybe doesn't represent.
So that's what I'm getting at. So I asked, and they said
it's easy to be misled by that.
That's right. So if I have a server at Five Guys, or whatever the case may be, and they donated $5 to the Sanders campaign, they'll type in Five Guys. And frankly, I don't know why they would do that, but in this case, we saw that they did. We're using Five Guys as an example, but they did that. And so then we look at it, and a casual observer might just start to see a bunch of people from a particular organization, a bunch of Five Guys employees donated $5 to these campaigns. what do we do with that information? And frankly, do we even really care? They're participating in the political process. Does that make us think, why are all these employees doing this? Then you get to, I think, the ownership level of owners giving money to political campaigns. Okay, now they're the owners are the ones doing the policy of the business, supposedly, or not supposedly, they are. And if they're privately held companies, they pretty much just do what they want, answer to their shareholders. If it's only a few, then they pretty much get to do whatever they want. And then so you take that information and what do you do with it? And so that was the interesting thing I saw on social media this weekend with all of these, is people saying, well, I'm never gonna, Wine Spectator donated to Trump. I'm never gonna buy that magazine again, or we can't deal with this. Okay, all right, that's okay. Where does that stop? Now, what if the president, not the owner, but the president donated it to the Warren campaign? Mm-hmm. How do we feel about that? Now, actually, no, we don't want to put that person out of a job because they're giving money to a campaign 100%. We do like. How? But also,
let's back up even more and say, okay, how much can we trust this data to begin with, right? Like, if Salvatore made a great point before we went live here, it was really easy for a lot of people to donate to Planned Parenthood under Mike Pence's name. So how easy would it be for a disgruntled employee or just anybody that wants to kind of bring some bad reputation onto a certain company for whatever reason to donate on behalf of them to an organization that they know they would be against? Yep. So how trustworthy do you think this information can be, Mike?
I mean, based on what I see, the information is trustworthy in that it represents what somebody inputted into the computer with a donation. I would think if somebody made a $100,000 donation to a campaign to screw with somebody else, that's some serious dedication.
Trolling.
I might commend that level of trolling. But yeah, it certainly could happen.
I'd also say too, it's like you mentioned, let's say it was Mike, Dustin, and Sabato each donated for Five Guys. The average person doesn't know if the three of us are three of the Five Guys or if we're just three employees at Five Guys. Yeah. So it's hard to sift through that. But I do think the high level takeaway that I'm seeing is now with where we are and also in a political climate, whether you're talking wine, you're talking wine retailer, wine publications, we're coming into an election year, or we're in an election year, and we're also in a recession, and we also have high unemployment. So people are going to be more, I think, a heightened awareness of where they spend their money, and if they can actually get the goods and services they need, in addition to moving forward a political agenda that they're aligned with, that they feel will help change the world in a better way around them, then that's going to be sort of there's more ROI on that than just treating purchases as a commodity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think it's, of who in the organization is doing what. Likely in larger organizations, it's going to be balanced out by employees. Maybe the employees go in one direction, an owner goes in another direction, or the owner donates to everybody because they want to support all candidates that could potentially help their business. You might not generally vote Republican, but maybe voting Republican would be good in your particular state on a particular election year because you need their support on a business issue, or the exact opposite, or something similar on a Democrat. It goes to that point. Maybe people are going to vote for the person, not the party, and so you have to look at this data and in a way, or you don't have to do anything. Do whatever you want. But I think a smart thing would be to look at the data in a way and say, okay, hold on. I see that this person from a winery, donated to this campaign. Let me just step back here and evaluate that. And if I want to, there was a lot of knee-jerk reaction going on this weekend from all sides that I saw, and I just thought, well, do you really know what? Do you really know? Do you ever talk to the guy? I mean, again, how do we know? Now, the interesting thing about this data, guys, is that Biden it only lists two donations from one party for Biden. So I don't believe that. I
but find in the world, and so maybe it has to do with how you classified, like what box you checked. I think it's data in, data out. It's not saying clean data went in and clean data is coming out. So
100%.
I think,
but let's say, but just for instance, though, you put out on Twitter, all of these people donated, 1,200 people donated to Trump in the wine industry. One person donated to Biden. On its face, that information is shocking, and it would make the wine industry look like 99.9% of the wine industry is for Trump. Well, we know that's not true. And so that's a prima facie representation of data that we would have presented to us. So we didn't see that this weekend. We only saw the Trump side, and then they started to release some other data points. And in this organization, by the way, American Association of Wine Economists, I've been following and a subscriber for many years, and they do great work. I love the information. I mean, it's academic, and sometimes it's a little heavy, but it's very interesting information. It's just data. It's economics. It's not positioned. And I love reading this stuff. But you have to actually put your mind into it and do some work on the data.
Yeah, I think today in today's landscape, it's really easy, right, to just get really fired up. Somebody takes a screenshot of one piece of this data, right, and puts it up on social media. Then it can be made to look a variety of different ways, right? It can be made to look like everybody in the wine world's donating to Trump or Sanders or whoever's posting it can kind of send their own message with that, right? So I think the big thing here is not have those knee-jerk reactions, see where this data is coming from, dig into it a little bit, find out exactly how it's coming through so you can make your own informed decisions as an individual. Me, for instance, I'm not going to care if a server donated to a certain political party. Probably going to care a little bit more if the ownership donated to, a party that I maybe don't want to be involved with, and I might choose to spend my money elsewhere if that were the case. I know other people, I have friends of mine that might be a little bit more dogmatic about it and say, anybody that works for that company, I'm not going there because they're, giving money to a political party that I don't agree with. And, that's on the individual. That's on everybody gets to make that decision themselves. But I think the point being is, don't just take a screenshot from Instagram or social media to be all facts there. It's you really got to dig into it.
But it's also a great lesson and a great potential warning for businesses of, be very careful because, the people on this, that were posted on Twitter this weekend on, regardless of Trump or Biden or, Sanders, for instance, in this study, they're sitting at home drinking iced tea or something and watching the news, and all of a sudden everyone's saying you're a terrible person. They're like, where's this even coming from? I don't even remember. Like, oh, right. I guess, yeah, I went to that dinner. I didn't know I was invited. I went to that dinner. Who knows? Or I purposely did this, and absolutely I stand by it. But you've always got to be watching what's out there because, you're a business, and these people are talking, the entire conversation this weekend was about, or on this particular thread, was about how we're not going to support the businesses or how we are going to support the businesses based on this information.
And I'd say the moral of the story, 100% of statistics can be sliced, diced, cut, and cropped to express different perspectives.
Oh, yeah,
exactly.
I just Googled that.
That's really impressive. Yeah, I mean, but I think as part of a larger conversation too, let's just tie it to the wine, keep it with the wine and hospitality industry, would just be, even what about guests? As an owner of a restaurant, if you had a guest that was was just either donated or part of a political campaign that you didn't agree with, would you reject service? Would you turn them away? I'm asking you guys.
Are you asking me? Oh God. I don't think so. I mean, me personally, no. I think, I get to do what I want with my money and make my decision in the voting booth, just like everybody else does. Maybe I wouldn't want to buy things from their business, from their store, from their restaurant. Maybe I wouldn't visit, but anybody that's coming to me, I can't in my right mind, being a hospitality person, turn them away for something like that. I think everybody has their right to make those decisions on their own.
Yeah.
Personally.
Sabato?
I think, how do you avoid the mob mentality? And first of all, I would never want to put any of my employees in a position where they had to take care of somebody that they felt was that they felt was working, their political initiative was working against them personally. And so I would want to make sure any of my team had a safe way out to do that. And I respect
Great point.
100%.
Great
I think
point.
that's first and foremost. But
What would that safe way be? Just say, hey, like, I don't want to wait on them. I'm gonna...
exactly like, you know, Dustin, Mike Lazo's coming in tonight for dinner. Just want to.
We know you can't stand the guy. Do you want to be in a different section tonight?
Exactly.
You hate lawyers, as we all do.
I want to be the, you know, the highest level of professionalism, and if not, then I completely understand and respect that. I want to give you an opportunity to do that, but I think we've been so divided as a nation. If we can take a higher road and find ways to help get things across, or to, you know, not to say that when you left and I went to drop a check, I wrote a little note and gave you that with a little comment and my feedback on it, Mike, instead of giving you a check and say, hey, dinner's on me, but you know, here's a little words of wisdom that I would offer to you on behalf of my team and myself. That could be a way of doing it as well. So I think there's different ways to creatively.
It's interesting.
Without,
so if somebody comes into the restaurant, you're managing, and you actually doesn't even say anything, but you know that they donated money to the Boulder County Library System.
I'm talking about the actual person itself. I'm not talking about somebody donated. I was talking about the politician itself.
Okay. I'm sorry. I apologize. I wasn't saying if like a politician came in.
Oh, I was.
It's that. Okay, I got you.
Interpreted as well.
Okay, all right. I was talking about like spending your money.
He was saying, you know, if Joe
If Trump
Smith
came
donated
in, if Trump came in,
$1 million to the Trump campaign, and we all knew it, and he was coming to our restaurant to dine that night, you know, would we refuse him service?
Yeah. But
there was also
I think your argument about staff still stands, Sabato. I think that's
I think if your staff ever feels uncomfortable, I mean, this is anywhere. If your staff is uncomfortable, but the problem I would foresee with that would be, and this just goes now to all walks of employment, where you can't treat employees different. You know, you have to treat everybody the same. So if somebody says, look, I'm uncomfortable serving, you know, Elizabeth Warren because I don't support her, or I'm not comfortable serving Donald Trump because I don't support him, can you please put somebody else on? Absolutely, no problem. You know, step back, thank you. But then what if somebody comes in and they're donating to a cause, and it's something as like the Boulder County Library System or something, I don't know, you know, something very silly, like, and no offense to the Boulder County Library System, but just like donating to a cause, and they say, look, I'm not comfortable. And
somebody's anti-books.
Ridiculous. Yeah, like that. You're like, come on, are you kidding me? You're not going to serve them because
Dewey
of this?
Decimal guy.
Yeah, you don't like the Dewey Decimal
System.
You're not going to support that?
Like creating a work environment that everyone feels safe, and that's what I would want to do, is try and whatever that is in that belief. And if it was something as small as that, I'd say, okay, you're not doing this. We have to have a big conversation, intervention afterwards. If you have something that wrong with books, but I think, but if there are other things that, you know, I absolutely would want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable, and that's the way we can provide the best hospitality experience for everybody.
All right. What happens when nobody feels comfortable?
Well, then maybe it's time to not let that person in. If you have an entire team of people.
Yeah.
A
lot of hypotheticals here.
No, I know. That's
a lot of what else.
We only discuss the best topics with the best conversation.
Speaking of the best topics and conversations, phase 1 is opening, and today is the first day of phase 1 in New York City. Restaurants are not included on that, so it doesn't change much here. But I know in other parts of the country, we've been able to see people going through that and experiencing restaurants in this new way and interacting with them. And Mike, I believe that's the case for you in Boulder. Is that correct?
Yeah, Colorado. We started just right there at the end of May, the 27th. People started opening back up at 50% capacity, and we've had a large expansion. A large relaxation of rules and regulations for outside dining. Even something happened late on Friday with allowing restaurants to share space from a liquor license perspective, which is very interesting.
And what does that mean? So can you give me an example?
Yeah, like if you and me have a restaurant right next to each other, and there's one, maybe there's a patio that joins, I don't know, that we could both have access to. I can use my liquor license on it and you could use your liquor license on it. I think in pretty much every state that I can think of, you have to have unique liquor licensed spaces unless you have some common consumption or some variance. So that's interesting. And I think that, it goes to what I've been seeing from, locally, City of Boulder, state of Colorado, trying to help businesses find a way to make revenue, period. I think some of that's self-serving in a very good way of trying to increase sales tax revenue. I mean, cities and states are really in trouble here. So phase one has I think been geared towards just getting people comfortable to get back open and to get back into the businesses.
So,
I dined out last week.
and what was that like for you the first time going into, well, I guess you were at that diner in the Dakotas, but aside from that, eating in your hometown, restaurants that you have been to before, so you have before and after perspective.
Yeah, it was great. And I don't say that lightly. I frankly expected it to be very awkward. And I'd been to this restaurant many, many times. And I expected it to be awkward because first night, it's going to be, all the employees are going to be on edge, the guests are going to be edge. And I really found none of that. I felt like everyone was prepared. The only thing I really noticed was, in my perception, a few tables had been taken out. And I did look, and I felt, and I kind of just looked around the room and saw, yeah, I guess that's 6 feet there. I guess that's 6 feet. And so I noticed a few tables were gone, and then I noticed masks. But the service was very respectful. I think geared towards the idea that maybe we were uncomfortable, but we were comfortable, and it seemed like after an initial kind of welcome, it was all very normal. So I was impressed.
Were there any steps of service that were noticeably different, whether you're talking about signing pens, taking?
Oh yeah, no, good question.
Menus?
The QR code menu, which
Okay.
I've heard anecdotally that a lot of places are going to that. So the QR code, use your iPhone or whatever you have to.
Menu and wine list.
Boy, the wine list, we just kind of ordered. We just worked with the SOM to order. But yeah, I take that back. You do the QR code and it pops to the website and you pick the menu you want to look at. And so that was pretty easy, frankly. Look, everyone's got their cell phones out anyway. Mm-hmm. So that to me was like such an easy thing. I could see that sticking around for a lot of restaurants, just the ease of that. That was the big thing. I felt like like I said, the servers were more in tune to the guests and making sure that they showed that they were respectful of personal space, maybe in a way that, not at this restaurant, but like just other places, maybe they'll hang on the table a little bit longer, get a little closer. This was a very much more step back, but it wasn't, I noticed it in a good way, I would say. Mm-hmm. So
what about wine service? How did that happen? Did you notice anything different?
Yeah, the wine service, not necessarily different. I was paying attention, but it was more, done away from the table, but in view. Mm-hmm. So, table in the middle where the wine was kept for the table. And then.
So they brought the box to the side station instead of bringing the box of wine to you?
They rolled the keg over. Okay. Yeah, it was keg wine for this particular occasion. And so they rolled it over. But the nozzle, we used a special.
Everybody had their own hose. Yes,
exactly. Yeah, it's jungle juice, back in
Cake stands for everybody.
That's right. So that was good. I talked to some friends who had been out to some other restaurants as well here in Colorado, and they were looking for cues of safety. Some, for a couple examples where not wearing a mask, like a GM not wearing a mask, and I'll tell you, that would probably be a put off to me, not necessarily even because I care if somebody's wearing a mask, although I do in that setting, but more that you're the GM of a restaurant. The rule is for you to wear a mask. So if you can't follow a basic rule, whether I agree with it or not, what else aren't you doing? So that's to me is very obvious.
Working the line that's not wearing a hat, but everyone else is wearing a hat. It's like your hair doesn't fall out of your head. So that's why I think all executive chefs should shave their head too, to prevent that.
I definitely agree. So then some positives I've heard would just, showing the cleaning, and I saw the cleaning going on at this particular restaurant, and I've heard from friends that, just seeing them clean was a positive experience. So yeah, interesting.
One thing about that is I think restaurants need to think about, well, I agree, you want it to be visible so people can see the proactive measures you're taking. Really do your research on cleaning chemicals, because I've been in restaurants where I've walked in, 10 minutes after it's happened, but they were cleaning windows, for example, and they're using some aerosol spray on it. Yeah, they got the windows clean, but that smell lingered to it. And you don't want your restaurant to smell like a gas station bathroom. So doing the research to say, okay, what safely cleans different surfaces in my restaurant, and what does that actually look like, smell like in the middle of a dining room?
Yeah, the high school cafeteria smell.
What about hand sanitation? Was that something that was on display? Were people washing their hands regularly that you could see? Or, obviously, I think for a lot of people, one of the biggest things is servers holding the plates that these people are about to eat off of. And, I think sanitation is going to be a pretty important thing when we think about this beyond the masks. Was that visible? Was that something that you were seeing, or what was their take on that?
Well, that's actually, so somebody mentioned to me that they went to a restaurant in Denver and they offered hand sanitizer, a personalized hand sanitizer on each table. It was logoed with the restaurant, and you would take it with you when you left, but provided you a way while sitting there to sanitize your hands. And they thought that was great. I didn't have that experience. I don't know if I really care if I have a hand sanitizer at the table, but
no, I'm talking about the staff. I mean more the staff, like
okay.
The ones that are bringing, running food out from the kitchen and dropping it on your table with their bare hands. To me, that would be, a place where you don't know what else they've been touching before. You don't know how long it's been since they've sanitized their hands.
I didn't see any hand washing, but I wouldn't have been able to from where I was sitting. I believe, and I have to be honest, I don't remember, but I believe they were wearing gloves. But I also noticed, and I did notice, and I don't know if it was different. The way they were holding the plates was always, was from the bottom, not around the edges in any way. But I struggled to recall if how exactly that happened. I don't remember thinking this is not good at any point.
Was there anything noticeably different at the bar, whether it be waiting?
Bar was closed.
Were made? The bar was closed. Okay.
Bar was closed. Yeah. I mean, there was a bartender making drinks for the restaurant, but the bar seating was just not there. And so there was a different hum to the restaurant. And this is the same thing I experienced when I went to the other restaurant in South Dakota, where there was no energy. There was no hum, if you will, to the restaurant. You definitely were getting in and eating. This was different, but their bar was dead. And that took out a buzz that you would generally an echo you would generally have.
And also, when you look at it from a financial standpoint, that does take a hit on the restaurant without those bar seats and the drinking or people showing up early. I was talking with a restaurateur in New York as they were trying to look to open up their outdoors, which will be one of our first phase, will be outdoor dining. And in my mind, I think it's better, when you look at the flow through on liquor sales than on food sales. I would encourage people to create outdoor areas just for drinking and maybe snacks, like a limited menu, rather than just say, oh, we're just going to pull our tables outside and we're going to do the full menu service there. Because when you look at it, the weather is contingent, and you have those fixed costs of, well, we brought the staff in, is it going to rain, is it not going to rain, we prepped all the food, and also it's inefficient from execution and service of it. Whereas if you put tables in and it's just drinking for 4 people, they're spaced properly, you can turn those much quicker. People don't linger. So that's a way to offset it. In the past, I've also when we would open restaurants, instead of using all of our tables for dining, we would want to take tables out, which we did, physically remove them to help set the kitchen up for success and control the experience. But we also then would buy new legs for the tables and the new stand in the middle. And I think for like $40 on restaurant.com, you could buy like a higher table. So you could actually turn a regular dining deuce into a stand-up table. And we would do that for people that were waiting to help make the wait more hospitable, but also it helped us on our beverage to food mix and our overall profitability. So that's the approach that I would take, where I would almost invest in new table legs, elevate all your tables and space them out properly. If you want to take reservations, it's just limited to 4 people, no more. And we have a menu that's, hey, we only have these 3 champagnes and, we have fried chicken or whatever that might be. And that's the experience that we're offering, rather than going back to something that might not be as profitable.
Yeah, that's really smart. So Mike, curious, obviously they did a really good job. It sounds like, they're on top of it where you went. Would you go back? Was the experience good enough?
Oh yeah. It absolutely was. The big issue is generally, will I go out to restaurants right now? I don't know where you guys come out on it. I actually, that was such a great experience that the COVID thing really just doesn't bother me. I've just been so used to not spending money for 2.5 months and cooking at home, that having a check delivered to me was astounding. And I didn't want to pay. And I mean, we did.
Yeah, exactly.
And nothing about the restaurant, but it was more, I'm just not used to this. That was kind of like the odd thing of like, oh yeah, I forgot what it's like to pay a restaurant. I mean, we've been doing takeout here and there, but very, very different than dining in.
I'm going to start dropping checks at guests that I have over at home for dinner, just to help them get reacclimated to going back.
Yeah, get them back into it.
Like in have you ever seen One Crazy Summer, when they go to the grandma's house and she serves them food and then gives them a check? John Cusack movie. Come on, it's a great movie.
No, but I do think that is a big psychological challenge that people are going to have, especially as you've been looking and saying, oh, I know how much I've been spending on groceries for the past, each week. And then when you go back into dining out, it's like, wow, that's a little bit different. And at home, I've been drinking wine that I've been buying over the years, and just kind of forgetting about and putting it in storage or in my cellar. Now it's like, oh, this is like free wine in some sense.
It feels like cellar wine always feels like free wine, I think.
Especially when it's coming out of your cellar into my glass. Like,
that's right.
Yes.
That's the interesting thing is just the consumer behavior. I'm really interested to find out from you guys, the word on the street in New York, 7 to 14 days in, the initial push of, okay, they came back, our guests came back, but how many of them came back the next night? I would love to see the numbers. I'm going to start asking around. Again, we're only 2 weeks in. A lot of restaurants didn't open the first week. So for a lot of folks, we're only 1 week in. I'm interested to see if people are at 100% of the 50% capacity or not, because that to me is going to tell a lot.
Yeah, behavior is still really up in the air, right? You just don't know what's going to happen. I think, maybe people are excited in the beginning and then it starts to fade off a little bit, whether it's because they just don't love the vibe or because they're used to not spending as much money, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
I think it depends on where you are too. You're in Colorado, which is, if you're going up to Boulder, it's a much smaller town. Denver's maybe a little bit different. Here in New York, we've got enough people here that maybe we can sustain for longer because there's just more diners per capita. Maybe it'll keep the places busy longer.
Now, do you guys, with phase 1, do you guys plan on going out this week, or is it an option?
It's not an option.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think, to Dustin, what Dustin was saying, one of the other unique aspects of New York is it's not just, do I want to go out to dinner tonight, but also transportation and how you get to the restaurant is one of the most high risk aspects of it.
None of us Uber.
Yeah.
So
but a lot of us here have to rely on subway, which I haven't been on the subway in probably 4 months. I've been on city bikes and biking around, so I can do that to some extent. But that is also going to cause people, I think, to dine more locally than they have in the past with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we do have a question. I got to read it here. Mike, for Colorado, is there more information that has come out on closing certain streets like Larimer, that's down in Denver, where all these restaurants can share space as well as liquor law? Thanks for the question. That there is more information that they are allowing street expansion, parking lot expansion, sidewalk expansion. And then, like I said, the the idea that you could essentially combine or overlap liquor licenses. That's a fairly big deal. I expect to see other cities doing that, and I think that they already are, from what I understand. So again, just more ways to generate revenue. Now, what I've seen in Boulder and around Broomfield or Westminster, just kind of around the Denver corridor, it doesn't look good, from people putting out Home Depot buckets full of concrete and posts in like yellow rope to dominate. I mean, it's very unattractive, and it's been hot here, for instance, and I don't want to sit on a tarmac and eat. I'll just go home. So I don't know how you're going to deal with that. I mean, you kind of really want to go out on a 95-degree day and sit on the sidewalk and drink. Like, you got to really want that experience. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I'll be interested from you guys to see in the next couple of weeks, on hot, humid, city days, what's going on out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to be on a sidewalk in Napa having a glass of wine. Okay, you could probably handle that. But a tarmac somewhere else, no. So interesting stuff, gents.
Yes,
Definitely.
All right.
Take us out, Dustin.
All right. Well, thank you everybody that joined, and gentlemen, always a pleasure. Absolute pleasure every Monday. Really great to chat. So everybody that's listening, please remember to subscribe and give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Keep an eye out. We are planning to go to full audio with this soon, and Mike, I'm sure, is going to have some updates on that in the coming days, I think.
I'll give you a quick update. We are working on it. Our technicians are working on it. And so we expect it to be podcast, all of the episodes be available podcast within the next 7 days. That's what we're expecting. So iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And your feedback, we'd love to know, is that something that appeals to you? I think that COVID has forced us into this particular format, which we love, but audio is so much more portable.
Exactly. Would love it if you could share with your friends, get more people onto the show. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Awesome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.